والتدبير أيضا، واشهد من براك مولاك المهيمن إنه يراك، فوض له أمورك واحسن بالظنون، لا يكثر حمك ما قدر يكون، لو ولم وكيف قول ذي الحماك يعترض على الله الذي خلق، وقضى وقدر كل شيء بحق، يا قلبي تنبه واترك المجون، لا يكثر حمك ما قدر يكون، قد ضمن تعالى بالرزق القوام في الكتاب المنزل نورا للأنام، فالرضا فريضة والسخط حرام، والقنوع راحة والطمع جنون، لا يكثر حمك يكون، أنت والخلائق كلهم عبيد، والإله فينا يفعل ما يريد، همك واختمامك ويحك ما يفيد، القضاء تقدم فاغنم السكون، لا يكثر حمك ما قدر يكون، الذي لغيرك لن يصل إليك، والذي قسم لك حاصل لديك، فاشتغل بربك والذي عليك في فرض الحقيقة والشرع المصون، لا يكثر حمك ما قدر يكون، شرع المصطفى الهادي البشير ختم الأنبياء البدر المنير، صلى الله عليه الرب القدير، ما ريح الصبا مالت بالغصون، لا يكثر همك ما قدر يكون، اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه. I think he's tired. Did he come for the Orad? He did come for the Orad, yeah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. So fortunately from one perspective, unfortunately from another perspective, we've reached the last session. Fortunately because we've had these opportunities to study this very blessed material, that if we open our hearts to it, that it will be life-changing. Not because of any of us, but because of the author that penned these words from a heart that was radiant with the light of faith. And that this is one of the most important books that we can spend our time with throughout our lives. And our teachers from whom we learned that parts of this book and really its essence, they're people that are dedicated to it. I know that our primary teacher in Tarim that has at least 3 or 4 different classes where they're reading in different places of the Ihya al-Madin, that right now as we speak. And so there's many people throughout the world that have been committed to reading and rereading this blessed book, because it aligns us so much with the way that we need to be. And then unfortunately, because as if this is the last session, that we are not going to be able to go any further. But inshallah, at least we'll meet every 2 months. I don't want to scare our team, but it would be nice to meet every month. It would be even better to do this every weekend. It would be even better just to dedicate an hour or so a day to the Ihya al-Madin. Alhamdulillah, that we could pace ourselves and to really look much more closely at every one of these blessed ibarat and phrases that he includes in his blessed book. So this is the second part of the benefits of interaction, which as that Ustad Amjad introduced, really this is how Imam Ghazali presents the pitfalls of retreat are in relation to what you miss by going into retreat. The opportunities that you could have had were you to have interacted with people. And so Ustad Amjad covered 4 of those, and that we will finish the last 3, and then end bi'idhnillahi ta'ala with a brief summary of the etiquettes. If we're going to retreat for a short period of time, or a moderate amount of time, or even a long period of time, what are the etiquettes? And again, this has been emphasized the whole weekend, as it will be emphasized as well in this last session, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And then in the closing session, we'll wrap it up with some practical advice on how to bring these meanings into our lives, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So, the next one is what Imam Ghazali calls a ta'deeb wa ta'addub. And that's translated here as learning adab and inculcating it in others. Adab is a very important word, and it's a very comprehensive word that includes a long list of manners, etiquettes, proprieties, different things that we do and things that we avoid. And ultimately, it is the key to the spiritual path. Without adab, there's no way to travel the spiritual path. There's no way to draw near to Allah without adab. And ultimately, after performing the obligations and avoiding the prohibitions, which in reality are adab. In fact, you could say everything in our deen is adab. That learning proper belief is teaching us how to have adab with Allah, with our belief. Learning the rulings of the sacred law are teaching us how to have adab. Don't do these things. Make sure you do these things. And then the doors open after that for us to have higher degrees of refinement in relation to adab. The more that we avoid what is makruh, the more that we do what is recommended, the higher degree of adab. And if we want to reach the highest degrees of adab, even in relation to what is permissible, not only do we cut back a little bit and make sure that we're not extravagant, but also we make sure to do that permissible thing with a righteous intention. And then there's various etiquettes for those that are in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the closer and closer that we get to Allah, the more adab that is required. The closer and closer that you get to the Messenger of Allah, the more adab that is required. And in fact, you're not even going to get close without that refined adab. So if you look at the closest of the companions, like a Sayyida Fatima al-Batula Zahra, like Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, like Sayyidina Zayd ibn al-Harith, like Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik, that like the Ashar Mubashirin bil Jannah, look at their adab with Rasulullah. It is the best adab that you can possibly imagine for the students, if you will, even though we call them Sahaba, of the greatest teacher in human history. It was our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So, at-ta'deeb wa ta'addub. If we're going to just remain at home and limit our interactions with people, we potentially lose the ability to learn adab from mixing with people. So, if we just pause here and then we'll get into what he's saying, is that this is a very important meaning. This should be one of the intentions that we make in mixing with people, is that we learn adab. And it is one of the ways in which that we can purify our hearts by being around people and noticing the things that they do and they don't do. Not to judge them or condemn them. Yes, if we can advise someone, we advise them. But so you and I can learn. And there's a lot that we can learn like that. And so if someone has a temper and they're in public and they've ever seen someone else lose their temper, you're like, oh my God, do I look like that? And yes, you look like that or even worse. And it's like, oh my God, I don't want to lose my temper then. Right? And may Allah forgive us for things that we see and know that we shouldn't do and then do. But we learn these types of things by seeing other people. If anyone has been around someone who's just really stingy, it's not really fun to travel with someone who's just super stingy. Right? Or to be around someone who's just really miserly. You're just like, oh wow, I hope I'm not like that. Right? As opposed to being around someone who's just generous and that is not, or someone that is just easygoing as opposed to someone who is just very burdensome to be in their presence. And they're just, what's called in Arabic, thaqeel, just heavy. Right? There's some people that have a ruh that is khafifa, and there's other people that are just thaqila, just heavy to be around certain people. And it's good to be light and easygoing and not to have takalluf. If there's takalluf where you feel that you have to force something upon yourself, that al-ulfa la tudum ma'al kulfa. Is that ulfa, that sense of familiarity and that friendship that you have. If there's kulfa, if there's burdens, is that it's very unlikely that that relationship's going to last too long. So by being with people, we can learn adab. Now, Imam Ghazali, of course, this is a book for the people traveling the spiritual path. So he frames it in a certain sense. And in particular, what it is that we need to learn by way of disciplining the soul from being with people. And so he says here, as for the, where am I here? There we go. Is that by learning good manners, we mean by this, training oneself to endure people and to struggle to bear their harm through breaking the evil inclinations of the soul and conquering desires. All right. La ilaha illallah. So let's remind ourselves of the definition of good character. Good character is when people deal with you in a way that you dislike, is that you bear that and only deal with them in a way that you should deal with someone. So good character by nature means that people deal with you in a bad way, but then you're required to do the right thing. Good character is not just like smiling when everyone else is smiling or that just enjoying what everyone else is enjoying. No, good character is precisely when people are doing something they shouldn't, is that you do what you should. And so that this requires mujahada. And he calls it here muqasat nas, right? In enduring people. And tahammal adahum, and bearing their harm. And this is something that you'll find. And yes, that you might have a few you might have a close-knit group of people that know you and respect you, and it's not like that. But almost everyone, even prophets, when they start dealing with general people, it requires a lot of patience. People require patience. And anyone that has worked in any job and know what it's like to have coworkers and to work with other people know exactly what I'm talking about. Everybody knows if you've gone to school and you have an array of different types of people, there's all different types of people. And it's only a handful that are actually really easy for you to get along with. And those tend to be the people that you associate with. Beyond that small circle, it requires patience. But this is not a bad thing. This is an opportunity. This is what Imam Ghazali is saying. This is an opportunity for us if we frame it right and have the correct conception to benefit. And then when mujahada, to struggle, to learn to bear their harm. Why are we doing this? So kasran nafs, in order to break the nafs. This is the language these scholars use, is that the nafs has to be broken. Kasran nafs wa qahran lishahawat. This is very strong language. To break the nafs and conquer the desires. Look at this terminology. Is that breaking the nafs and conquering our desires. This is a core part of the spiritual path. And he said is that this is actually better for someone than being alone, if indeed that their character is in need of refinement. And I think that applies to almost everyone I've met in my life. There's, maybe 1 in 10 million or 100 million that they're just born with almost perfect character and they don't really need to be around people. So this applies to everybody, that for the most part. And so this is actually a good thing, is that we have opportunities for ourselves to then that learn adab from people. And so here he goes to talk about the Sufis, and again, the S word, which we need to move beyond it being a pejorative word, as the people of the Sufis are those who want to draw near to Allah. Simple as that. They are those who want to move up in degrees of certitude, where they move from ilm al-yaqeen to ayn al-yaqeen to haqq al-yaqeen. They are people that want to obey Allah wa ta'ala outwardly and inwardly, be people of taqwa, and strive along the spiritual path. Rid their hearts of vices, adorn their hearts with virtues, and perpetually be in a state of dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and completely submit to Him in all their affairs. That's the Sufi. And whatever someone else means by the word Sufi, we don't know what they mean necessarily. That's what is truly meant. That's the Sufi. That is the one who, and how could that person not be someone that's great, that wants to dedicate their life entirely to Allah? That is the true definition of Sufi. And he says here is that this is why it is especially a technique amongst the Sufiya, the Sufis. And other people might use it as well. But it's a very good technique. They tend to train their students, right, in the importance of service. And you find this when you go visit khanaqahs, zawiyas, tekkes, whatever word that you call it, is that when someone first goes to these places, you'll find is that there's an emphasis on service. And this is important in order to break our nafs. If any one of us think that we're too good to do any form of service, that means that we have arrogance still in our heart. Anyone who's serving, even if they move from the highest position in the organization to the lowest, or they're shifted at one point from here or to move there, whatever it is that they're doing, they might have a scope of their work. But if they pass by something around, I'm not going to do it, that's for the janitor. Is that if we think that we're too good to be a janitor, is that there's something wrong with our hearts. And that in actuality, in this work, in places of learning, in places of remembrance, is that being a janitor is a lofty state to be in. We don't look down upon anyone or anything. And that this is why service is so important, because it breaks your nafs. It brings about a very good state, and This is hopefully something that we'll increasingly be able to achieve, to encourage people from the time that they're young to do some form of service. And yes, it needs to be that regulated a little bit. But alhamdulillah, this is why we love having the young kids that pick up all the coffee cups, right? And then that some children are in charge of putting the etar on, وهكذا. And the more that we can teach children this, if you're sitting in a chair and an older person comes, you give your chair to that older person, and so forth and so on. And preference of others over ourselves, different little types of service. This is key. And this is a core part of refining our character. And this is definitely one of the benefits that can come from mixing with people. So encouraging service. Now, unfortunately, some of this could be interpreted in the modern world as spiritual abuse. See, I came there and they just started commanding me and putting me to work, right? Now, if someone really has a bad intention and they're trying to use people for their own personal motives or something like that, okay, that's not a good thing to do. But let's not conflate the two. That you and I need to serve, and that people should never want to be served. That's the balance. And that if someone's in a position where they need someone to help out with certain things, even that relate to their own personal life, that still we have to remain broken and humble in this whole process. But every single one of us is in need of service. And ultimately, when we talk about da'wah, when we translate it as service, that's what we mean. Whatever it is that we're doing, whether our job is to make dua, whether our job is to teach, whether our job is to support financially, whether our job is to volunteer, whatever it is that we do, is that all of that ultimately is a form of the da'wah, and at its core, it's considered to be service. This is one of the best ways of all to remove veils from the heart and to break the nafs. And it's one of the type of a'mal that takhriq al-hujub, that pierce veils. And according to our teachers, the likes of Habib Abdul Qadir Saqaf, rahimahullah ta'ala, this is one of the that acts in the end of time that especially pierces the veils and draws us near to Allah. Taking care of the needs of people, service, being in the needs of people. And we might do it in an organized fashion, and then all of us have to do it organically. And as we even are here all together, we should all be in the service of one another. That anyone that you see needs help. Someone needs help picking up their shoes, or someone needs help walking down the stairs, or someone needs help putting on their coat, or whatever it might be. We should all be aware of each other's needs. And if someone comes into the room, are there any chairs? I say, okay, there's no chairs. Organically, someone should just perceive, let's get that person a chair, and hakada. And that this is the type of environment that we want to create. And this is the way that they were during the time of our Prophet ﷺ. And one of those etiquettes is to make space. And Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala says, and when they say to you that make space for people in the gatherings, make space. Yani that يَفْسَحِ لَهُ لَكُمْ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will that make space for you and open you up, your heart up to receive His mercy subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are beautiful things, because if someone comes in and everyone's just sitting there, how would that make someone feel? Or we tend in the morning to sit in a circle, or kind of like an oval when it gets a little bit larger. And if someone comes in and they're sitting outside the circle, right, that doesn't make someone feel good. People should just naturally make space, expand the circle a little bit. And if the circle's too large, then khalas, we move to rows. But naturally, we should understand these blessed etiquettes. So by being with people, by mixing and interacting and being in the right places, this is what you learn. And especially if there is an intention to do so. And that part of this also is that there are going to be things that happen that are distasteful and that we actually don't really enjoy. So that's the adab part. But he also talks about ta'deeb. If you don't mix with people, you're not going to be able to help inculcate adab in other people as well. And this is not something that you necessarily that bring upon yourself. This is something that just naturally happens when Allah Ta'ala puts certain people in certain positions. And these are the great teachers who help us refine our character. So there's called adab and then ta'deeb. Adab is to that want to achieve a state of adab in and of yourself, and ta'deeb is to help someone do that. It's to inculcate that in someone. And our teachers used to say is that there's 3 different types of shuyukh. There's what's called a shaykh of ta'aleem, a shaykh who can teach you one of the sciences of the religion. And the precondition there is that they have a ijaza, they have a license to do that. They've studied a particular subject or book or topic with a teacher. They've learned it, and now they can convey that meaning. We can't teach that which we don't know, or that which we don't have permission to teach. That's a shaykh of ta'aleem, a shaykh of that teaching. And then you have what's called a shaykh of tahdeeb, a shaykh of refinement. This is a shaykh who might or might not be knowledgeable in the various Islamic sciences. At very least, he has to know the basics of the religion. But this teacher helps you refine your character. These are people who know the inroads of the spiritual path very well. And they've sat for extended periods of time before masters. And their teachers have then permitted them, and this is something that people usually run away from and don't want to assume the responsibility of, because no one in their right mind would ever want to be in this position. If someone ever desired it, they would be left to themselves and they would destroy themselves. But these are the type of people that help us refine our characters. They know the inroads of the spiritual path and things that we need to be wary of. And if we're over in this direction, how we can balance it out here, or if we have this particular problem, what is the antidote to it, and hakada. They help refine our character. And these shuyukh are very important because they assist us in that overcoming our nafs and putting our ego in place. And then the highest degree of shaykh of all is what's called a shaykh of fath, a shaykh of opening. And that this teacher is someone who's a means for the lifting of the veil from your heart. And these people exist is by virtue of being with them. And you might have all 3 of these shuyukh in one person. Or you might have that 2 of those characteristics in one person. Or you might just have one. Generally speaking, the shaykh of ta'aleem, you might have many of them. But then the shaykh of tarbiyah, of tahdeeb, is usually only one, or one at a certain time. Then you move on to someone else. And then the shaykh who's a means for your opening is that usually only one when we talk about the great opening, and then there could be others in relation to other types of openings. But these people exist. And there's a multitude of stories of the past of that openings that people receive from the great shuyukh. Right? And examples of the most well-known examples of these are, for instance, the relationship between Imam Abu Hassan al-Shadhili and Sayyid Abd al-Salam ibn Mashish, for instance. The classic example, as well as the one of that Mawlana Rumi and that Sayyidina Shams and so forth. These are just classic examples. And there are many, many others. And that the shuyukh are that means from their blessing for very powerful things to happen in the life of the murid and on their path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of this is rooted in our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All 3 of these meanings, he was the one who taught them, he was the one who that purified them, and he was the one who was a means for them receiving openings. And think about how many ahadith that you can pull out of companions that received openings from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether it was just his blessed hand hitting their chest, or whether it was just one of them was in the Prophet's presence, and then that explains to the Prophet that what happened to him the night before, and all these different instances of that people coming to know Allah and having the veil lifted from their heart, from the blessing of being with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then this is an aspect of his inheritance that is carried on throughout the generations. So when people that hasten to criticize this type of shuyukh, they need to be careful. This is definitely an aspect of his inheritance. The outward knowledge is an aspect of his inheritance, just as the inward knowledge and refinement of someone's character is. And just as being a means for openings is also from a part of his inheritance. And Allah Ta'ala distributes this amongst different people. So if we never mix with people, we never have the opportunity to learn adab from them. Or if someone, if Allah puts someone in that station, is that they don't have the opportunity to especially resemble the Prophet system in this way, in terms of teaching people that good character and that proper adab. So then that goes on to speak about humility, is that this is one of the great traits that we can learn and that you and I need and is central to our religion. And one of the great ways to learn humility is to mix with people. And so if we never mix with people, as Imam Ghazali says, is that we won't have the opportunity to really be humble. Now, there is a type of humility that we would be able to have on our own. And that is just recognizing the true humility, which is just absolute impoverishment before Allah. Yes, that is true. But when we speak about humility, usually we speak about it in relation to other people. So the essence of humility is absolute impoverishment before Allah. But that manifests with our humility before other people. So just as you have the opposite of humility, which is kibr. Kibr is arrogance. It's a trait of the heart. And then takabbur is the arrogant things that you do in relation to people. So the reality of humility is a state of the heart before Allah. And that likewise manifests in certain things that we do or don't do in relation to other people. So people are, that by mixing with them, this is one of the great tests to see our degree of humility. So if someone is known as Ustad or Sidi or Shaykh, and then someone calls them Brother Fulan, in your heart you're like, this person, don't they know who I am? Don't they respect me? Right? A'udhu billah. Right? The people of this path, they're very different. Is that one of them that called them, Ya munafiq, you hypocrite. Right? And he was actually happy. He said, finally someone in the city knows my true name. Everyone else has been given me the wrong designation. This is how I really am. In a real way, this is the way these people are. We should never be troubled. And that, titles are titles. We tend to shy away from titles here, and just names are better. So no claims are being made. And adab is good, and I understand people's desire to want to respect other people. But the problem is that when we start using these titles, a lot of people qualify in people's minds with the same title, and there's a huge difference between levels of knowledge. And so we have to be a little bit careful. I'm, kind of on the fence there. It's something I think that requires a little bit of discussion. And not that it's going to happen in a kind of contrived way. Usually these type of things happen organic, but it does need to be directed. The point here is, in the spiritual path, is that we should just be fine with our names. What's your name? My name is Yahya. My name is Ahmed. My name is Abdurrahman. We should be fine with just our name. And that we should be fine. A brother is a station. That's a brother fulan. That's always beautiful to me as a convert. Is it sister so-and-so, brother so-and-so, because we're family. I always actually really love that, hearing that, like brother so-and-so. And that's actually a beautiful thing, because it means that you're like family. And that's how we're supposed to be as believers in terms of its ideal. So being around people helps you learn how to be humble. And the best way to actually become humble is to get married. So anyone who's not married, right, just get married and get feedback on how you felt the talk went when you go home, or the class went when you go home, or the tangents that you want on how long that you took when you go home. And it's very helpful, because it keeps us, right? And that we all know who's really in charge. So فإنه من أفضل المقامات is that humility is the most virtuous of stations. And it is not possible in solitude. It could be that, and now he's going to take a slight tangent. We're going to come back to this. That arrogance is the reason for choosing retreat. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So it's possible that arrogance could be a reason why people actually don't go out and mix with people. There are many examples of a man withdrawing to his home and his motivation is arrogance. He abstains from interacting with people only because he is not honored or held in esteem. When I go to that gathering, they don't put me up front. Is it when I go, people don't speak to me that respectfully, and so forth. He is not honored, held in esteem, or he views interacting with disdain and believes retreat will elevate his status and preserve his high praise among people. I'm going to preserve my brand if I go to that place. Is that then people are going to see it's very easy to invite me places. And actually, I was really shocked that no one should be serving the dawah if this is how they're thinking, by the way. This is really, a'udhu billah. But unfortunately, there are people that are in the front teaching that it's shocking to think of this, but actually have these types of things across their mind. If someone invites you to that serve in some capacity and ask you to speak on a particular topic, my advice to you is if you have time and you can do it, do it. Don't ask about how many people are going to be there. Don't ask about who else is going to be there. Don't ask who cares what the honorarium is going to be, any of these types of things. Just go help people. Right? And that we should especially be willing to go to the people that no one else wants to go to. And that where they're not going to have a grand entrance for you, and they're not going to, give you that first-class treatment, that type of thing. They might not even pick you up from the airport, or who knows, they might put you on Spirit Airlines or something, or whatever. Yani, it doesn't matter. If you want to go help people, go help people. We should have that humility. So sometimes it's our arrogance that prevents us from going places. Now, I mentioned that in the context of teaching. It could also be in the context of people attending. I said, I'm not going to go there for kada, kada, right? And we need to watch over our hearts when it comes to this. So perhaps he withdraws out of fear that people will see his faults if he interacts with them. One should not believe that he is an ascetic and focused on worship. Okay, so we shouldn't see ourselves like, oh, I'm so pious. I'm just going to stay away from these vile people that are preoccupy me from worship, right? That's not how we see ourselves. Is that he stays in his house as a cover for his faults while perpetuating people's conviction about his asceticism in devotion, but without immersing himself in seclusion for remembrance and reflection. No. And then he says, if one is not occupying himself with the remembrance of Allah, then his withdrawal from people causes his preoccupation with people to intensify because his heart is merely turning to their view of him, and he continues to desire their honor and respect. So it's possible that someone has more inclination towards people in isolation and while they're withdrawing than people do when they're actually in public. This is what he's warning us of. This is one of the dimensions of this. But if we get back to kind of really what he's trying to say here, as he says, is that humility and interaction do not diminish the eminence of one who has a high rank in his knowledge or his deen. So so many examples. He mentions the example here of Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib, is that he would carry dates and salt in his back from the marketplace. And he didn't even have a bag. They didn't have bags like we have. That he would carry it that in his sleeve, radiallahu anhu. He'd carry it in his garment, in his sleeve. And then he mentions here Abu Hurairah and Hudayfa and Ubay and Ibn Mas'ud, these four great companions. Is that they would carry that bundles of firewood on their shoulders. Now, and that they would carry that little bags of flour. That Abu Huraira, when he was the wali, was the governor of Medina, is he would that go out and collect firewood and bring it back. And he would say things like, make way for your emir. He's the emir. But he still had the humility to go out and get firewood. So for us, we just turn on our stoves, right, and it lights, and then we cook. In previous times, people didn't have it that easy where they had gas stoves like we have. They'd actually have to go out and collect firewood and then make a fire and then cook on it. And so he that would do this, he would do this, radiallahu anhu. And then the Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, used to buy something. So he would go to the marketplace himself and then carry it to his house himself. And his companion would say to him, give it to me and I will carry it. People wanted to carry it. And he said, the owner of a thing has more duty to carry it. And so there's a beautiful story. One time we were traveling with our teacher, Habib Ali Jifri, on September 11th, 2002. So 1 year after September 11th, we were traveling from Chicago to San Diego. And there was a few of us with him, and he had a briefcase. And as we were walking to the gate, we kept trying to grab the briefcase. One person went, no, let me carry it for you. And then he would like pull it away. And then someone else tried to get it, and he pulled it away. And he wouldn't let anyone carry his briefcase. So we get to the gate, and this is the time of like the random checks. All of us got randomly selected for secondary checks. So they search all of our things, and they go through the briefcase with a fine-tooth comb. And then they actually asked us, like, we saw on the video cameras that you all were fighting over this briefcase, right? And so that we started to think that there was something in here that was dangerous. And then we went on to explain to them, like, no, this is our teacher. And this is a part of proper etiquette with your teacher, is that you offer, to carry his things for him and so forth. And this is from his humility that he refused to, that give it to us. And then the man was actually impacted by it. He said, this is how we used to be in America. He said, this is how we used to be here in this country. And anyhow, is that humility like this, and this is how our Prophet himself was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's this beautiful story he mentions about Sayyidina Hassan bin Ali, that he passed by some people that were having to ask people for things who only had scraps of bread. And as he's passing by, he said, come and eat with us. That they were so well, they literally had to ask people for things because they were so poor. And they just had scraps, leftovers. And so that he dismounted, he gets off of that mount, and that sits down on the road and eats with them. And then he got back up on his own and kept going. And then he says that Inna Allah la yuhibbul mustakbirin. Allah Ta'ala does not love the people of arrogance. So look at the beauty of that he would get down and eat with them and then go about. And unfortunately, this is in the way that cities are divided. This is one of the blessings of actually living in a city, is that you, with all the other things that are not good of living in bigger cities, is that one of the blessings is you get to interact with all different types of people regularly. And you can have in a relatively closer, and maybe not close, sometimes close, but a relatively closer vicinity, different types of people. And that opens up the door for us too, that have more interactions. But if you think about it now, technology creates all of these barriers. Think about the difference of walking on the street and walking by someone as opposed to driving by them. You can have your tinted windows and your windows closed and that type of thing, and right, maybe at best you wave at them. And the funny thing is that people who don't even want people to even say hi to them, and almost like make you feel strange for wanting to be a good neighbor and to just be friendly. And, part of that is maybe a lot of people have been burnt and they're very hesitant to open up too much. That's part of the story. But what a terrible society that is that people are that scared of other people that we can't even, that the niceties that are supposed to be there of community, that people are that hesitant to do that. Anyhow, the essence of what he's saying here is that if you don't interact with people, how are you going to learn humility? Interacting with people is an opportunity for us to learn adab, just as it's a wonderful opportunity for us to learn humility by being around people. And I would say, excuse me, in our time, especially in a place like the United States of America, where our societies tend to be, our society tends to be very polarized, and you have that the inner city, you have the suburbs, right? And you have rural areas. And obviously not all the breakdowns are like that. Sometimes in the middle of a big city that you have very expensive and very posh places. The point here is that you and I should feel very comfortable getting out of our comfort zone. Even if you live in a nice place or you have a nice house, whether that be in a big city or whether it be in the suburbs or whether you live on a very large piece of land, that get out of your comfort zone and get used to having the humility of interacting and mixing with all different types of people. This is really, really important. It's so healthy. And get your kids used to that as well. Again, even if you live in the suburbs, and it goes both ways, is that people that are in a more inner city environment should interact with people that are in other environments as well. This is healthy. There should be mutual visitation. There should be mutual support. And we fall so short in this. We really do. And people end up in their silos, unfortunately. And at very least, we have to make the intention to try to break out of this and to do what we can. And if you don't have humility, though, you'll never be able to do it. That's one of several traits that are needed in order to really accomplish this as a community. And then the last benefit he speaks of is experience, and what he calls in Arabic, tajarib. And this is essentially things that we learn by being around other people. There's a lot that we can learn. And experience is really important. And I remember that Hassan Laga'i, rahimahullah, he has a book on remembering God. And he mentions a story in there of a man that he met. And this man, everything always worked out well for him. He had good health, never had any financial difficulties, seemingly no problems in his life whatsoever. And you're reading this like, oh, wow, that would be great. That's kind of how I want to be. And then he says, he was the most immature and inexperienced person I've ever met in my life. SubhanAllah. Like you're thinking all of these things are good, but then you realize like, oh, there's another side to it as well. Not that you invite tribulation upon yourself, but by living life, by going through difficulties. Now, Imam Ghazali is not talking about difficulties per se, but the same meaning extends to that. By going through difficulties, you get experience that you start to transform and change. You learn certain things. And again, it is not a good idea that in a place like the one in which we live that shelter your kids so much as that they have no experience of the world. Nor is it a good idea to throw them out to the wolves. So that's a horrible idea. But to shelter them, that too much is also not a good idea. Is that what you want is the right balance. And we don't have to use the word bubble. As someone online, I forget the name of the lady, she says it's not a bubble when she was being criticized for how she raised her kids. She says it's a greenhouse. Right? There's a difference between a bubble and a greenhouse. Yani, it's a controlled environment so that this young person can grow up in a healthy fashion. And that as they get stronger and stronger and the roots of their religion and their being start to grow deeper and deeper, then there's that degrees of interaction that take place. But what we want ultimately is when it comes to retreat, or when it comes to the training that someone has to undergo over an extended period of time, is that eventually the roots are so deep and so strong, is that they can interact and engage principally with anyone and everyone in society. That they can go into situations where people are doing things that they really shouldn't be doing, and they're not affected by that at all. Rather, they are able to bring people out of that. And that's the prerequisite, is that if someone is that strong And they can mix with people, even people that are really caught up in doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But not that they're encouraging them or saying what they're doing is right. No, let alone helping them do it. No. But if they can be a voice of reason to bring them out of that, right? And that's very delicate. And many of us have family members that are not Muslim, where we have to go to Christmas parties and birthday parties and things of this nature. And it's very important to go to preserve family relationships. But when you go, who you're around, that how long you stay, and if you know that people are going to be drinking, it's better to get there very early, make your rounds, speak to people. When people start acting crazy, then you just slowly depart, and people don't tend to notice anyway. And then outside of that gathering, maintain relationships with them. Is it so they don't feel like they miss anything, even if you that didn't take part in that game when people are acting sloppy and not doing the right thing, and that heck of it. So be wise in your dealings with people. But here, this is what we want. We want people to be strong, where they've grown up in a controlled environment. Yes, we're required to preserve the fitrah, but if we slowly introduce the way that you would with inoculation, that slowly introduce a little bit of the disease, not so that they're actually doing anything wrong, but they're aware of it at the level of awareness. Then they become immune to it, and they'll be protected from it. And if you open up the door too quickly, they may get caught up in it. Right? So tajarib are something really important. So he says about this, the seventh benefit, gaining experience, means benefiting from interacting with people and following the course of their states, i.e. going along with what people do. The natural intellect, the aql, is insufficient to understand all the positive elements of the deen and this world. Experience and practice bring benefit, and there is no good in retreat for someone who has no experience, who has not experienced trials. Thus, a young person who withdraws remains unsound in judgment and ignorant. It is appropriate that he engages in learning to attain, through a period of study, the experience he needs that would be sufficient for him. He can attain other experiences by hearing about them. Thus, he does not need to interact. Okay, and so one of the things that we need to be a part of, that the training of da'is, people that are going to be giving da'wah, of that young people of knowledge who are going to be serving communities, similar to what they might do where you do like your rotations, is that where you actually spend time in different communities and with someone who's been working in the community for 20, 30 years. And you go and you move to different communities and you develop experience. How do they speak to people? What are the problems that they're dealing with? What is the nature of their discourse? And so forth and so on. And if you do this, you can get a lot of very good experience, especially in the early years, so that ultimately the Sharia study that you did for an extended period of time, whether it's in a madrasa here or here and overseas or even just overseas, it will enable you then to have your finger on the pulse for people's needs. And just as we also have to go do ongoing education. And it's actually a really good thing. I'm glad that they make doctors, most doctors that I know, that they seem to always be studying for the next test, even though I guess it's not, depending upon how old you are. But this is actually a really good thing. There should be ongoing education. My mom had to do this. I forget the name of the certification. She's a personal trainer. And that every so often they have to get a certain amount of credits to maintain their certification. So they read about the new research and things like that. This is really cool. This is actually a really good idea. We need this in the realm of the du'at as well, is that we should be aware of the trends of our time and that the changes that are happening and the needs of the people, so that when people speak, is that it's not in a vacuum. They're not talking here and then what people need is here. Is that they're connecting with people and dealing with their very real needs. So this is one of the great benefits of mixing with people. And this is not just for people who are teaching or serving the community. This is just in life. There's so much that we learn, right? You had a relationship that just went sour and it ended up in a divorce. We should try to keep our relationships together, but if someone ends up in a divorce, what did you learn? We should have a growth mindset. What could I have done better? Where was I naive? And I'm not encouraging people to get divorced. What I'm saying is that it's not haram and it's not, it's culturally taboo, but we have to be careful of that. Sometimes it's better for people to go their separate ways, and it's going to be worse for them to stay together. You do everything that you can to salvage it, yes. But if it's simply not working, sometimes it's better to go your separate ways. And then you learn, how can I become a better person after that? And both the man hopefully will get remarried as well as the woman. And then maybe they can do something better next time. And you get experience. That you had a job where you had a horrible boss, and that a job that you got fired from. Again, with that growth of mindset, what can I learn from that? So that if we do it again, we'll be able to do it better, and so forth and so on. So there's a remarkable amount of things that we can learn by mixing with people. Now, Imam Ghazali only speaks about that in a very short paragraph. I actually went longer. He says, among the most important experiences, he's going to always tie it to the spiritual path, is that he tests himself, his manners, and inner qualities. From the most important experiences is that he, the person, tests himself, his manners, and his inner qualities. In other words, we don't truly know how we are until we mix with people. And when we mix with people, a lot of stuff comes out. And then mixing with people is actually a blessing, because if we wouldn't have mixed with them, it wouldn't have come out. So we actually come to learn about our faults. And again, the best way to do this is to get married. And then also, though, when you have friends, and that when you're mixing with people just in general, when you're in a position where you're managing a team, or even when you're working for other people, and so forth and so on. All of these are experiences and opportunities for you and I to come to know our true state. So he says here, when he's in seclusion, the evil consequence of each incidence of anger, malice, or envy is not brought up. There's nothing that caused that to rise. It could lie dormant in the heart. Your heart could be filled with vices and you don't even know. These attributes are in themselves the means of destruction, and it is obligatory to overcome them and conquer them. It is not sufficient to pacify them by distancing oneself from what instigates them. Everyone get that? It is not sufficient to pacify them by distancing oneself from what instigates them. Okay? And وَلَا يَكْفِي تَسْكِينُهَا بِالتَّبَاعُدِ عَمَّا يُحَرِّكُهَا. Why? Because they're still there. And if they're there, they're going to stain your heart. They're going to create rust, so it's not going to reflect what it's supposed to reflect. And he says here that he gives this really graphic metaphor. The example of the heart filled with these vile qualities is the example of an abscess, right? A boil filled with pus and decomposed matter. So you can imagine just a big boil on you, right? And it's like red around the edge, and it's filled with pus, right? And it's pretty gross. And when they pop, like a whole bunch of pus comes out, right? This is what he's saying, right? And he says, perhaps one who has this boil does not perceive the pain as long as it is not moved or touched. So if it's just sitting there, it might not hurt. If he does not have a hand to touch or an eye to see its form, and there's no one to move it, then he might think to himself that he is safe. He does not perceive the boil in himself and is convinced it is not there. But if something were to move it, or if the cupper were to puncture it with a lancet, then the pus would come out of it, and the fluid that had been prevented from flowing would flow out. Likewise, the heart filled with greed, malice, anger, jealousy, and other blameworthy qualities pours forth its vileness when agitated. Ya Allah, what a metaphor. In other words, is that when you mix with people, the way you are comes out. And we shouldn't panic. We're human beings. Human beings are susceptible for having diseases of the heart. Is that what we should do is embrace it. And like, oh, I had some istithqal that was heavy for me. And then you question, why do I feel a sense of heaviness towards someone else receiving a blessing? I'm not going to tolerate that in my heart. And then that night, you turn to Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, and you force yourself to want good for your brother. And you ask Allah Ta'ala to rid that from your heart. You make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give that person what you felt heavy in your heart in relation to them, and actually even more. Right? Or is that you find yourself that looking down upon people, speaking ill of people. Then you again, that we don't panic, we catch ourselves. And then we remind ourselves of our origin and how we should really be humble, and that we force ourselves to be in positions of the humility and so forth. In other words, this is why learning the basics of the science of tasawwuf is fard ayn. It's an individual obligation. Because especially with the big diseases of the heart, when these things come to the surface, when we mix with people, you have to know what to do with them. First of all, you have to know they exist. Secondly, you have to know that how it is that you got them. And thirdly, that while you simultaneously cut off the roots of these diseases, that you also work on the short-term solution to them by doing these acts of mujahada, of that spiritual, that discipline, that will then lead to your purification. And if we do this over and over again, especially with vigor and with resolution, even for a short period of time, you will find that they go. And then different temperaments and different people struggle with different things more than the others. Some take a little bit more time than others. But with a teacher especially, and reliance upon Allah Ta'ala, and a commitment to work hard on them, you'd be surprised how quickly that the heart becomes pure. And so he says here that mukhalata, by interacting, is that there's a tremendous clear benefit in expelling vile qualities and overcoming them. And he says this is why it has been said about traveling with people, which is a type of interaction, as-safaru yusfiru anil akhlaq, is that travel exposes one's characteristics. You might be able to hide things when you just come to the masjid for 30 minutes and then go home. But when you travel, is that this tends to expose them. What do you do when it's all of a sudden unexpected? There's a change in the plan. Or that something happens that you just dislike, or someone gets sick, or someone does something incredibly annoying, or someone attempts to harm it. All the different types of things that can happen. How do we act? So this is an incredibly important benefit, is the benefit of experience. And if we don't interact with people, we're not going to attain experience. And if we want to help people, experience is really, really important. That you and I have experiences that create us as individuals, in which we develop both religious and spiritual humility that are prerequisites really for really benefiting people. And in this whole process, we have a constant connection with ulama, with scholars, just as we have a constant connection with our teachers who helped refine our character, just as we maintain a connection with elders in the community who've been there, done that, and have seen generations of people come and go. This is essential. And there are times where you benefit from your elders in very short periods of time, that which you don't benefit for years. And I remember I was not too long ago in Toronto, where there were some questions that we had about that certain things to do for the Al-Maqasid seminary. And that one of the teachers there this person's read so many books that he can summarize what would take you years to read if you could even understand it. And you benefit sometimes in 10 or 15 minutes, that which you would take you months or even years to benefit by consulting elders. And we were recently in Houston, and one of the really blessed elders that I wish more people would know about and benefit from, Imam Qasim Khan, who was in Houston. And he gave us marriage advice. And he summarized it in about 2 minutes or less, right? What would take you you'd have to read 4 or 5 books to get that wisdom. And he just summarized it in like 5 minutes, and here you go, right? And it was incredibly amazing advice. And I asked someone to write it down, and so hopefully we got it written down. There was like 6 or 7 really salient points that were really, really beneficial. But this is what elders have the ability to do, is because of their experience, is that they can just summarize the most important things to you. 30 or 40% of that book might not even relate to you. But when you give advice like this, everything they say, because they know their own people and they know their background, is they can get right to the point. This is the essence of what it is that you need. So this is what he says, and with that, that completes the benefits of interaction. We have till 12:30, correct? So then we will come back now to the same statement that we mentioned on Friday night. And we'll expound upon this a little bit more in the closing session. But this is what Imam Ghazali says. If you know the benefits and dangers of retreat. So the whole talk has been about withdrawing from people, minimizing our interactions, limiting them, that going to retreat, that focusing upon your spiritual state. And what he wanted to do is he wanted us to know the benefits and the potential dangers. Yani the things that you'll miss out on if you actually do this. Then he says, it is a mistake to say that a ruling on retreat is universal. There's not only one thing that's going to, in a cookie-cutter fashion, fit every single person in this room, let alone, is that the entire community, let alone the ummah of our Prophet ﷺ. Rather, it is appropriate to look at the individual and his state, at those he associates with and their states, at the motive for his socializing and what is lost because of his socializing and his interacting, all in terms of these above mentioned benefits. So everybody's different. Someone who's young and unmarried is not like someone who's married, right? Married people should not come home and be like, sweetie, I'm going into seclusion. I'm going to retreat for the next year. Here you go. I'll see you in a year, right? You can't do that, right? If you have responsibilities upon your shoulder, is that someone who has parents that need them, you can't just say, Mom, Dad, I'm going to go into a retreat, right? Even though they need you. You have to look at your circumstances, right? But still, there might be obvious ways that in things that you can't do, but then there might be other things that you can do. People want you to be part of a WhatsApp group that there's just certain things that this group does. And then you consider, is that really good? Oh, this is an outdoor hiking nature group and I really need this. I'm going to go from time to time. There's good camaraderie, right? I'm going to join that WhatsApp group, right? Or it might be another WhatsApp group where after consideration, okay, that's not a good idea. But it's a different group that, no, that's actually really good for me. That's reminding me of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and posting things that speak of him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so we have to start weighing these things. Do I go here? Do I hang out with these people? Do I do this? Do I do that? What do I do? Even in terms of career choice, what is the trajectory of my life? Would I incline towards something like this or something else better for me? All of these decisions you and I need to make, and there's not one universal cookie-cutter way for everybody. And it is certainly possible for people to remain relatively reserved, but still to be very cordial and brotherly. Right? So this is the advice, is that just let people be. And if someone wants to be a little bit more reserved, and someone else is actually very outgoing, and their understanding of friendship and brotherhood is that one spends a lot of time together and there's a lot of socialization and things like this, then maybe that person's not the best person to really develop a close brotherhood with. But there could be other people. And if we can reach this level of maturity where our focus ultimately is Allah, that's what we should all be coming together for, is to draw near to Allah and help each other do that. Appreciate the diversity. There's not going to be uniformity with the unity. Let people be. Don't have to kettle up. Don't force people to do things. And let things happen organically. Get rid of the FOMO. Don't worry about that. and that preoccupy yourself with your Lord. If we just adhere to these simple principles, is that community will work very well if we actually adhere to principles, if we actually spend the time studying them and come to learn them. And so there's a remarkable amount of different potential ways of doing this. So he says, then what is lost can be compared to what is attained. At this point, the truth will be elucidated and the preference made clear. So we'll come back to that in the closing session, inshallah ta'ala. And then finally, we're going to just read through what he says here. And so he proposes a hypothetical question, a preemptive question. As for the etiquette of retreat, he says, do not give it much consideration. It is appropriate for one who is withdrawn to first intend with his retreat to restrain his evil from people. So the first intention is not to protect yourself from the evil of others. It's to protect others from the evil of your own self. Then second, he should seek safety from all other evils. Right? And third, he should seek freedom from the harms of failing to fulfill the rights of Muslims. And fourth, he should intend to focus with the utmost concern on worshiping Allah. This is the etiquette of his and the intention. So he mentions 4 intentions. If we're going to limit our interactions, we do so first with the intention of preventing people from our own evil. Second, from protecting us from that evils that exist. Third, is that we that protect ourselves from failing to fulfill the rights of Muslims. And then 4 is that we completely devote ourselves to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, next, in his seclusion, he must be diligent in gaining knowledge and undertaking action, ilm wa amal, and in remembrance and reflection, dhikr and fikr. In order to reap the fruits of retreat, he must prevent people from increasing their intrusions on and visits to him, for then his time will be wasted. He must hold back from questioning them about their news and listening to rumors spreading in the land and what people are preoccupied with. All of that sinks into the heart until it emerges during prayer or reflection when least expected. The status of news that reaches the ear is like the status of a seed in the ground. It must grow and its roots and branches spread out. Now, this doesn't mean that we should not be concerned with the Muslims. We should absolutely be concerned with Muslims. But at some point, that once we're aware of certain things, it's more important to move into action. But we have this nature of just things that happen. Oh my God, that so-and-so left. So-and-so was working for them. And then so-and-so, what's going on? Is something wrong? Right? So-and-so that didn't come to the wedding. Maybe that there's problems between these people. Like all these types of things. But people just are naturally drawn to this drama. The status of new, it must grow and the roots and branches spread out. Thus, one rumor evokes another. An important concern for one in retreat is cutting off the whisperings that distract from the remembrance of Allah. Such news is the source and spring of whisperings. And this is helpful for people who are not in a state of retreat. He must also be content with a simple life. Otherwise, he will be compelled to have recourse to people and be in need of socializing with them. One in retreat must also be patient with the harm that comes to him from neighbors. He must stop himself from listening to praise about him going into retreat or reproach of him for abandoning socializing. All of that affects the heart, even if only for a short time. The state of the heart's preoccupation will necessarily be an obstacle on his journey on the path to the hereafter. The journey is either through the diligence in the litany, wird, and remembrance with presence of heart, or it is through reflection on the majesty of Allah, His attributes, His actions, and dominion over His heavens and His earth. Or it is through contemplation on the subtleties of actions, what corrupt the heart, and seeking ways to protect from what corrupts. All of this requires to a clear mind, literally void, faragh, and attentiveness to anything that confuses the heart in this state. The memory of it, yani what preoccupies the heart, is revived. And if continually recalled, will come to mind when not expected. In other words, is that learning to engage our inner speech and train ourselves. This is a core, is a really important part of the spiritual path. And the vast majority of people are totally negligent of it. And that we have to, in a balanced way, that really start to, that understand our inner speech. There was a beautiful that contribution that a sister made this morning on muraqabah, and that essentially it was about the inner workings of the inner speech and how we should be when we recognize that Allah Ta'ala sees us at all times, and the questions that we need to ask ourselves, and the things that we need to think about, and how it is that we should that do certain things or not, and so forth. And it was extremely beneficial. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless her. And then he says, so he must, the memory, okay, he must also have that a righteous companion, so that his soul finds rest with him for some time during the day from the fatigue of diligence, meaning that you can't just solely be alone. There has to be some people that you still talk to. This is an aid for the remainder of the time in retreat. Patience is incomplete in retreat until he severs the desire for this world and what people are engaged in. There can be no severing of his desire except by diminishing his expectation, as he should not presume that he will have a long life. Rather, when morning comes to him, he should know he may have no evening, and when evening comes to him, he may have no morning. Thus, it is easy for him to have patience for a day, but it is not easy for him to maintain this patience for 20 years, or even if taking into account a lesser time. The one in retreat must also give thought to death and the loneliness of the grave whenever his heart is constrained by solitude. He must realize that whoever has not attained in his heart the remembrance of Allah and knows his ma'rifah of him will not be familiar with him and cannot endure the desolation of solitude after death. Whoever is familiar with the remembrance of Allah and gnosis of him, death will not remove that familiarity, for death does not destroy the state of familiarity and gnosis. Indeed, he will remain alive in the gnosis and familiarity of him. Indeed, he will be joyous with the grace and mercy of Allah on him, just as Allah Ta'ala says about the martyrs, and never think of those who have been killed in the cause of Allah as dead. Rather, they are alive with their Lord, receiving provision, rejoicing in what Allah has bestowed on them of his bounty. Each person fully devoted to Allah and the struggle with himself is a martyr when death overtakes him. Each person fully devoted to Allah and the struggle with himself is a martyr when death overtakes him, because of his acceptance and because he did not flee from it. The one who strives against himself and his desires. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam made this clear. The greater struggle is the struggle against the soul. Like the companion said, we have returned from the lesser struggle to the greater struggle. They mean the struggle against the soul. So this is really helpful. I really would advise everyone to get a copy of this book. And even if we're just doing 5 minutes of retreat, you could do the same thing every day during that 5 minutes. Or you could switch it up and do different things at different times. I would recommend is that we read this at least once a week. And maybe at first, that's what we do every day. We just read this. And so even if we're not going into retreat for an extended period of time, for several hours or several days or several weeks or several years, this is incredibly beneficial. Is that if this is how we are at night, and this is how we are aware of how it is that we need to be that in relation to life and prepare for the hereafter, then everything that we do during the day will take on a different meaning. Radiallahu an Imam Ghazali, may Allah to have mercy upon his soul and be content with him for this blessed knowledge that he's given us. And oh, how we're in need of this. Ya Allah, were we only to realize. And every time, and in any time, is that we're in need of this, especially in the time like the one in which we live in. Is that our distance from these meanings is why that we lack quality as believers. Is that the more that we're in touch with these meanings, the greater the quality in each individual believer and the greater impact that we're going to have people around us. If we're bereft of these meanings, is that there'll be many of us is that we won't have much impact. And that may Allah Ta'ala that bring these meanings to our heart, which will then that lead to all of the various actions that we do to being heavier in the scales. This path and these meanings are the secret of the greatest success in this world and in the hereafter. And that when we retreat, is that then it opens up the doors for us then to that engaged principally in a way that's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we can meet Allah tabarak wa ta'ala that in a good state and attain eternal felicity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us and give us tawfiq, ya arhamar rahimin, and to give us understanding of these meanings and bless us to be able to that practically put them into practice in our lives, ya arhamar rahimin. May Allah ta'ala bless us in this time that we spent together and to preserve the benefits for us, and may we continue to benefit from these sessions and all of the other activities and session things that we've been doing together this weekend, that throughout our lives, and may that benefit extend to our loved ones and those people that are around us and the people in these lands, ya arhamar rahimin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make faith firm in our hearts and bless us that faith to grow strong and for it to produce that a beautiful tree wherein which is that we not only are doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to do, not only not doing what He's prohibited us from, is that to move up in the degrees of closeness to Him through performance of voluntary acts and have the utmost adab and etiquette and everything that is that we do, and then taste the sweetness of faith and to find great solace in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.